Every evening at exactly 6 o'clock, 12-year-old David would finish his chores and run to the old community center at the edge of his village. The building looked tired with peeling paint and a rusty roof, but to David, it was the most magical place on earth. Inside that building, something incredible happened every single day. David lived in a small village outside the busy city of Accra in Ghana. His family wasn't poor, but they weren't rich either. His father fixed bicycles for the neighbors, and his mother sold vegetables at the local market. They had enough food on the table and a roof over their heads, but there was never any extra money for things like music lessons or fancy instruments. But David didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was the music that floated out of the community center every evening. A group of musicians from America had come to their village as part of some cultural program. David didn't really understand all the details, but he knew these people could make the most beautiful sounds he had ever heard in his life. The first time David heard them play, he was walking home from helping his father at the bicycle shop. The sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before. The music seemed to dance in the air, filling his chest with a warm feeling he couldn't describe. Without even thinking, his feet carried him toward the sound. He pressed his face against the dusty window of the community center and watched in amazement. 5 people sat on a small stage, each with their own instrument. There was a man with a trumpet that gleamed like gold in the evening light. A woman held a saxophone that curved like a snake. Another man had a guitar, and there was someone behind a set of drums. But the instrument that captured David's heart completely was the piano. It was huge and black, and when the pianist's fingers moved across the keys, it was like watching magic happen. The sounds that came from that piano seemed to tell stories. Sometimes the music sounded happy and made David want to dance. Other times it sounded sad and made his eyes water. But always, it made him feel something deep inside his chest. David started coming to the window every single evening. He would finish his homework as fast as possible, help his mother with dinner, and then sneak away to listen to the music. His parents thought he was playing with friends, and David didn't correct them. How could he explain that listening to this music was more important to him than anything else in the world? After a week of listening from outside, David discovered something that changed everything. Behind the community center near the garbage area, someone had thrown away an old keyboard. It was broken and dirty, with several keys that didn't work anymore. But David saw it as treasure. He waited until it was completely dark, then carefully carried the keyboard home. He hid it under his bed and waited for his family to fall asleep. When the house was quiet, David pulled out the keyboard and plugged it into the wall. Half the keys made no sound at all, but the other half worked perfectly. David had never had a music lesson in his life. He didn't know anything about scales or chords or proper finger positions. But somehow, when he placed his fingers on those working keys, something clicked. It was like the music he heard every evening had been living inside him, just waiting for a way to come out. Night after night, David practiced on his broken keyboard. He tried to copy the melodies he heard from the community center. Sometimes he got frustrated because he couldn't make the sounds exactly right, but other times something magical happened. His fingers would find a combination of keys that sounded beautiful, and David would feel like he was flying. His little sister Grace was the first to discover his secret. She woke up one night to use the bathroom and heard soft music coming from David's room. When she peeked inside, she saw her brother sitting on the floor, completely focused on the old keyboard, his fingers moving like he had been playing for years. Grace didn't tell their parents, but she started staying awake to listen to David play. She was only 8 years old, but even she could tell that her brother had something special. The music he made, even on that broken keyboard, was beautiful. David's obsession with the piano grew stronger every day. He started watching the pianist at the community center more carefully, studying how the man's hands moved, trying to understand how he created such incredible sounds. David noticed that the pianist didn't just press keys randomly. There was a pattern, a system, a language that David desperately wanted to learn. During the day, David found himself thinking about music constantly. When he helped his father fix bicycles, his hands would move as if he was playing piano keys. When he walked to school, he heard rhythms in his footsteps. Everything around him seemed to have musical possibilities. His teachers started noticing that David seemed distracted in class. His mind was always somewhere else, lost in melodies and harmonies that only he could hear. His grades didn't suffer because David was naturally smart, but it was clear that his heart was somewhere else entirely. One evening, David overheard a conversation that made his stomach drop. His father was talking to a neighbor about the American musicians. They were only staying in the village for 2 more weeks. After that, they would pack up their instruments and return to America, taking their beautiful music with them. David felt panic rising in his chest. These people had awakened something inside him that he didn't even know existed. The thought of them leaving felt like losing a part of himself. But what could a 12-year-old boy with a broken keyboard possibly do? That night, David played his keyboard with more passion than ever before. His fingers moved across the working keys, creating melodies that seemed to come from his very soul. Grace sat in the doorway listening with tears in her eyes. Even at 8 years old, she understood that her brother was special. As David played, an idea began forming in his mind. It was crazy and terrifying, but it was also the only chance he would ever have. The American musicians were leaving in 2 weeks. If David was ever going to show them what he could do, if he was ever going to find out if his dreams could become reality, he had to act soon. The next morning, David made a decision that would change his life forever. He was going to find a way to play piano with the American musicians. No matter how scared he was, no matter how impossible it seemed, he had to try because the music inside him was too powerful to keep hidden any longer. David spent 3 days building up his courage. Every evening he went to the community center window as usual, but now he wasn't just listening to the music. He was studying the musicians, trying to figure out how to approach them. The problem was David had never spoken to a foreign person before, and his English wasn't very good. At school, David barely paid attention to his lessons. His mind was completely focused on his plan. During English class, he practiced sentences in his head. "Please, can I play piano? I know music. Let me show you." But every sentence sounded wrong, too simple, not enough to explain the fire that burned inside his chest. His friend Peter noticed that David was acting strange. During lunch break, Peter asked, "David, what's wrong with you? You look like you're thinking about something serious all the time." David wanted to tell Peter about his plan, but he was afraid his friend would think he was crazy. Instead, he just said, "Nothing, I'm fine." But Peter knew David well enough to know that something big was happening. On Thursday evening, David arrived at the community center earlier than usual. Instead of going straight to his window, he walked around the building looking for another way to get closer to the musicians. He discovered that there was a side door that the musicians used when they took breaks. This door was usually open because the evening air was hot and stuffy inside the building. David positioned himself near some bushes where he could see the side door clearly. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might jump out of his chest. His palms were sweaty and his mouth felt dry, but he stayed there waiting for the right moment. Around 7 o'clock, the musicians took their first break. David watched as they came outside to get some fresh air. The trumpet player was joking with the drummer about something. The saxophone player was drinking water from a bottle. The guitar player was checking his phone, and then David saw him. The pianist walked out last, wiping sweat from his forehead with a small towel. He was younger than David had expected, probably in his 20s, with kind eyes and an easy smile. This was David's chance, but David's feet felt like they were glued to the ground. All his practiced sentences disappeared from his mind. What if the pianist was mean to him? What if he laughed at David's broken English? What if he said no? David's courage started melting away like ice cream in the hot sun. The musicians finished their break and went back inside. David had missed his opportunity. He felt angry at himself for being such a coward. He walked home that evening feeling defeated and disappointed. That night, Grace found David sitting on his bed, staring at his broken keyboard but not playing it. This was very unusual because David always played for at least an hour before going to sleep. "Why aren't you playing?" Grace asked, sitting down next to her brother. David sighed deeply. "Grace, what would you do if you really, really wanted something, but you were too scared to ask for it?" Grace thought for a moment. Even though she was only 8, she was very wise. Being scared is okay," she said, "but being scared forever is not okay. If you really want something, you have to try, even if your hands are shaking." David looked at his little sister with surprise. Sometimes kids say the most important things without even realizing it. The next evening was Friday. David knew the musicians would be at the community center, but he also knew that weekends might be different. Maybe they wouldn't practice as much. Maybe this was his last good chance. This time, David had a different plan. Instead of hiding in the bushes, he walked straight to the side door during their break time. His hands were shaking and his stomach felt like it was full of butterflies, but he forced his feet to keep moving. The pianist was sitting on a small chair outside the door, tuning his guitar. Wait, David thought, that's not right. David looked more carefully and realized the man with the guitar was actually the pianist. He could play multiple instruments. David stood about 10 feet away, trying to find his voice. The pianist looked up and noticed the young boy staring at him. "Hello there," the pianist said with a friendly smile. "Are you enjoying the music?" David's carefully practiced English sentences crashed together in his mind. "Yes, sir. Music is very good, sir," the pianist smiled wider. "Thank you. What's your name?" "My name is David, sir." "Nice to meet you, David. I'm Alex." The pianist set down his guitar and gave David his full attention. "Do you like music?" This was it. This was David's moment. His heart was beating so loud he was sure Alex could hear it. "Sir, I like piano very much. I play piano. Can I show you?" Alex looked surprised. "You play piano? That's wonderful. Where did you learn?" David pointed toward the community center. "I listen to you every day. I have keyboard at home." "Broken keyboard, but I play." Alex's expression changed from polite interest to genuine curiosity. "You learned by listening to us practice?" "Yes, sir. Every day I come, I listen. I try to play same music at home." The other musicians had noticed the conversation and were gathering around. David felt intimidated by all the attention, but Alex's kind expression gave him courage to continue. "Sir, please, can I play your piano? Just one time? I want to show you." The musicians exchanged glances. David could see them having a silent conversation with their eyes. He held his breath, waiting for their answer. Alex was the first to speak. "David, we're in the middle of preparing for a big concert. Our practice time is very limited." David's heart sank. He was getting ready to apologize and walk away when Alex continued. "But," Alex said, "I can see that music is very important to you. Tell you what, if you can wait until we finish our practice session tonight, I'll let you play our piano for a few minutes. Deal?" David couldn't believe what he was hearing. His face broke into the biggest smile of his life. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir. I wait." The next hour was the longest hour of David's life. He sat outside the side door listening to the practice session, but now the music sounded different. It sounded like hope. Every few minutes he had to remind himself that this was really happening. In just a little while he would actually get to touch the real piano that made all those beautiful sounds. When the practice session finally ended, Alex came outside and found David sitting exactly where he had left him. "You really waited the whole time?" Alex said, sounding impressed. "Yes, sir. I promised." "Well, a promise is a promise. Come on, let's see what you can do." As they walked toward the piano together, David's mind raced. This was his one chance to show Alex and the other musicians that the music inside him was real. His broken keyboard at home had taught him everything it could. Now it was time to see if his dreams could come true on a real piano. The moment David had been waiting for his entire life was about to begin. David's hands were trembling as he followed Alex into the community center. The other musicians had decided to stay and watch, which made David even more nervous. He had never performed for anyone except Grace, and she was his sister who loved him no matter what. These were real musicians, professionals who had traveled all the way from America. The piano looked enormous up close. It was much bigger than David had imagined from watching through the window. The black surface was so shiny he could see his reflection in it. The keys seemed to stretch on forever, perfectly white and black, waiting for someone who knew how to make them sing. "Take your time," Alex said gently. "There's no pressure here. We just want to hear what you've learned." David approached the piano bench slowly. His bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor. When he sat down, the bench felt different from sitting on his bedroom floor with the broken keyboard. This felt official, important, like he was about to do something that mattered. He placed his fingers on the keys and immediately felt the difference. These keys were perfectly balanced, responding to the slightest touch. When he pressed middle C, the sound that came out was pure and clear, nothing like the electronic beeping of his keyboard at home. David closed his eyes and took a deep breath. All the nervousness in his body seemed to flow out through his fingertips. He thought about all those evenings listening through the window, all those nights practicing on his broken keyboard, all the music that lived inside his heart. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft and simple, a melody he had heard Alex play during one of their practice sessions. But as David's confidence grew, something amazing happened. The melody started changing, growing, becoming something new. David's fingers found notes that Alex had never played, creating harmonies that came from somewhere deep in David's soul. The musicians stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't just a kid copying what he had heard. This was real musicianship, raw and natural and absolutely beautiful. David's playing told a story. It spoke of hot African afternoons and the sound of his mother singing while she cooked dinner. It captured the rhythm of his father's hammer fixing bicycles and the laughter of children playing in the dusty streets. But underneath all of that, there was something universal, something that any person from any country could understand and feel. The saxophone player, whose name was Lisa, felt tears forming in her eyes. In all her years of playing professionally, she had rarely heard anything so pure and emotional. This boy was completely self-taught, yet he was making music that touched her heart in ways that conservatory-trained musicians sometimes couldn't. David transitioned into another piece, this one faster and more rhythmic. His fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence. He incorporated traditional Ghanaian rhythms that he had grown up hearing, blending them seamlessly with the jazz harmonies he had absorbed from listening to the band practice. The drummer, whose name was James, started nodding his head to David's rhythm. Without even thinking about it, James found himself tapping his foot along with the beat. The boy had natural timing that couldn't be taught. As David played, he became completely lost in the music. The nervousness disappeared entirely. The community center faded away. The watching musicians became invisible. There was only David and the piano and the music flowing between them like electricity. He played for about 10 minutes, moving through different melodies and styles as naturally as breathing. Sometimes the music was gentle and contemplative. Other times it was energetic and joyful. But always it was authentic and real. When David finally finished, he lifted his hands from the keys and opened his eyes. The silence in the room was so complete that David could hear his own heartbeat. For a moment he worried that he had done something wrong. Maybe his playing had been terrible. Maybe the musicians were trying to think of a polite way to tell him to go home. Then Alex started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster and more enthusiastically. The other musicians joined in, and soon the entire room was filled with applause. But it wasn't just polite applause. These were professional musicians showing genuine appreciation for something extraordinary they had just witnessed. "David," Alex said, his voice filled with amazement. "That was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that?" David wasn't sure how to answer. "I listen to you every day. I practice at home. Music is in my heart, so I play what I feel." Lisa wiped tears from her eyes. "Kid, I've been playing saxophone for 15 years, and I've never heard anything more beautiful than what you just played." The trumpet player, whose name was Michael, was shaking his head in disbelief. "David, do you realize how gifted you are? Most people study music for years and never develop the natural feeling that you just showed us." David didn't really understand what they meant. To him, playing piano felt as natural as walking or breathing. He couldn't imagine not being able to make music. "Can you play something else?" James asked. "Maybe something completely different?" David smiled and turned back to the piano. This time he played a traditional Ghanaian lullaby that his grandmother used to sing to him when he was small. But under his fingers, the simple lullaby became something magical. He added bass lines and harmonies that transformed the children's song into a sophisticated piece of music that somehow remained innocent and pure. As he played, Alex was thinking fast. He had been touring with this band for 3 years, performing in different countries and meeting talented musicians everywhere they went. But he had never encountered anything like David. This boy had a musical gift that was both rare and precious. When David finished the lullaby, Alex made a decision that would change everything. "David," Alex said, "we're performing a concert here tomorrow night to raise money for the local schools. Would you like to join us?" David's hands froze over the piano keys. He turned around slowly, sure that he had misunderstood. "Sir?" I'm asking if you would like to perform with us tomorrow night in front of the whole community. You could play one song with our band. The other musicians looked at Alex with surprise, but they didn't object. They had all heard what David could do. They understood that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for everyone involved. David's mind went completely blank. Perform in front of the whole community, on a real stage, with real musicians from America? It seemed too incredible to be real. David started, then stopped. His voice came out as barely a whisper. Yes, sir. I would like that very much. Then it's settled, Alex said with a huge smile. Tomorrow evening, you're going to show everyone in your village what we just heard. Are you ready for that? David looked at the piano, then at the musicians who were smiling at him with warmth and encouragement. His entire life had been leading to this moment. All those evenings at the window, all those nights practicing on his broken keyboard, all the music that had been building up inside his heart. Yes, sir, David said, his voice growing stronger. I'm ready. David ran home that night faster than he had ever run in his life. His heart was pounding, but not from the running. He could barely believe what had just happened. In less than 24 hours, he would be performing on stage with real musicians from America, in front of his entire community. When he burst through the front door, his family was sitting around the dinner table. His mother looked up with concern. David, where have you been? Your food is getting cold. David stood in the doorway, breathing hard, trying to figure out how to explain what had happened. How could he tell them about his secret visits to the community center? How could he explain about the broken keyboard under his bed? How could he make them understand that tomorrow night their son was going to be on stage? Mama, Papa, David began, his words tumbling over each other in excitement. I have something very important to tell you. His father set down his fork and looked at David seriously. Sit down, son. What's going on? David sat down and took a deep breath. Then, starting from the beginning, he told his family everything. He told them about hearing the musicians for the first time, about finding the broken keyboard, about practicing every night after they went to sleep. He told them about building up courage to approach the American pianist, and about what had happened that evening. When David finished his story, the room was completely silent. His parents stared at him with expressions he couldn't read. Grace had a huge smile on her face because she already knew about David's musical secret. Finally, his mother spoke. David, are you telling us the truth? You've been playing piano all this time and we didn't know. Yes, Mama. I was afraid you would think it was silly, or that it was wasting time when I should be studying. His father stood up from the table and walked to David's bedroom. A few moments later, he returned carrying the broken keyboard. He set it on the dinner table and looked at his son with new eyes. Show us, his father said simply. David's hands were shaking slightly as he plugged in the keyboard, but when his fingers touched the keys, the music flowed out just like always. He played the same lullaby he had performed for the musicians, and his parents listened in amazement. When he finished, his mother had tears in her eyes. David, you play so beautifully. Why didn't you tell us? I was scared you would say it was a waste of time. His father sat back down at the table, looking thoughtful. Son, your mother and I work very hard to give you and Grace everything you need. But we never knew you needed music. If we had known, it's okay, Papa, I found a way to learn, and now I get to play with the American musicians tomorrow night. His mother's eyes widened. Tomorrow night? In front of people? Yes, Mama. In front of the whole community. Alex, the pianist, he invited me to perform with them. The next morning, word about David's upcoming performance spread through the village like wildfire. Grace couldn't keep the secret and told her best friend at school. That friend told her mother, who told the neighbor, who told the shopkeeper, and by afternoon, everyone in the village knew that little David, the bicycle repairman's son, was going to play piano with the American musicians. Some people were excited and proud. Others were skeptical. How could a 12-year-old boy with no formal training possibly perform with professional musicians? Some wondered if the Americans were just being polite to a local child, and the performance would be embarrassing for everyone. David spent the day in a strange mixture of excitement and terror. Alex had told him to come to the community center in the afternoon for a rehearsal with the full band. This would be David's first time playing with other instruments, and he wasn't sure how it would work. When David arrived at the community center, He found the musicians setting up their equipment for the evening's concert. The stage looked different in the daylight, bigger and more official. There were chairs arranged in rows for the audience, and someone had hung colorful decorations from the ceiling. "David," Alex called out when he saw the boy. "Ready for our rehearsal?" David nodded, though his stomach was doing somersaults. Alex led him to the piano and showed him how they would arrange themselves on stage. "Here's what we're going to do," Alex explained. "We'll start with one of our regular songs, and then I'll introduce you to the audience. You'll play that beautiful lullaby you played for us yesterday, but this time we'll accompany you. Lisa will play soft saxophone. James will add some gentle percussion. Michael will play quiet trumpet, and I'll support you on guitar. Does that sound good?" David had never played with other musicians before. He wasn't sure how it would work, but he trusted Alex. "What if I make a mistake?" David asked quietly. Alex smiled and put a hand on David's shoulder. "David, music isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing feelings with other people. If you play from your heart, just like you did yesterday, there's no way you can make a mistake." They started the rehearsal slowly. Alex played a simple chord progression on his guitar, and David began the lullaby. At first, it felt strange to hear other instruments playing along with him. But gradually, David realized that the other musicians were following his lead, supporting his melody rather than trying to change it. Lisa's saxophone added gentle curves around David's piano melody. James used brushes on his drums to create a soft rhythmic heartbeat underneath the music. Michael's trumpet sang harmony lines that made David's melody even more beautiful. By the third time through the song, David felt like he was flying. This was what real music was supposed to feel like. Not just one instrument alone, but multiple voices joining together to create something bigger and more beautiful than any of them could make by themselves. "That was perfect," Alex said when they finished. "David, you're a natural at this. Most musicians take years to learn how to play with others the way you just did." As the afternoon turned to evening, people began arriving for the concert. David peeked through the curtains and saw the community center filling up with familiar faces. There was his teacher from school, the shopkeeper who sold his mother vegetables, the mechanic who worked with his father, and dozens of other people from his village. His parents and Grace sat in the front row dressed in their best clothes. His mother looked nervous but proud. His father kept checking his watch and adjusting his tie. Grace bounced in her seat with excitement, waving at David every time she caught a glimpse of him. As the start time approached, David's nerves returned with full force. His hands felt sweaty and his stomach felt like it was full of jumping fish. Alex noticed David's nervous energy and sat down next to him backstage. "It's normal to feel nervous before a performance," Alex said. "Even professional musicians get nervous. The trick is to remember why you're doing this. You're not performing to show off or to prove anything. You're performing to share the music that's inside your heart. These people are here because they want to support you and hear something beautiful." David looked out at the audience again. These weren't strangers judging him. These were his neighbors, his community, people who had watched him grow up. They wanted him to succeed. "I think I'm ready," David said. And for the first time all day, he actually felt like he meant it. The concert was about to begin, and David's life was about to change forever. The lights dimmed in the community center, and Alex walked onto the stage with a warm smile. The audience settled into their seats, and David could feel the excitement in the air. From behind the curtain, he watched Alex introduce the band and explain why they had come to Ghana. "Music is a universal language," Alex told the audience. "It connects people across all boundaries of culture, age, and background. Tonight, we want to share some music with you, but we also have a very special surprise." David's heart started beating faster. This was it. Alex continued. "Yesterday, we met a young man from your community who reminded us why we fell in love with music in the first place. His name is David, and he's going to show you that true musical talent knows no limits." The band played their first two songs beautifully. The audience clapped enthusiastically, clearly enjoying the performance. But David could barely focus on the music. His mind was racing ahead to his own moment on stage. Then Alex stepped up to the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet David." David's legs felt like rubber as he walked onto the stage. The lights were brighter than he had expected, and for a moment he couldn't see the audience at all. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw hundreds of faces looking up at him with curiosity and encouragement. He sat down at the piano bench, and suddenly, all his nervousness melted away. This was his piano now, at least for the next few minutes. This was his chance to share the music that had been living inside his heart for so long. David placed his hands on the keys and began to play his grandmother's lullaby. The melody floated out over the audience, simple and pure and filled with love. He could hear Lisa's saxophone joining in softly, adding gentle curves to his melody. James's brushes whispered against the drums like a heartbeat. Michael's trumpet sang harmony lines that made the lullaby sound like a prayer. But it was David's piano that told the story. His fingers found notes that seemed to capture the feeling of being a child in his grandmother's arms, safe and loved and full of dreams. The music spoke of hot afternoons and cool evenings, of laughter and tears, of hope and longing. In the audience, David's mother wiped tears from her eyes. She had never heard her son play before last night, and she couldn't believe that this beautiful music was coming from her 12-year-old boy. His father sat transfixed, understanding for the first time that his son had a gift that was beyond anything he had imagined. Grace bounced in her seat, her face glowing with pride. She had known David was special, but seeing him on stage, sharing his music with everyone, made her feel like she might burst with happiness. As the lullaby continued, something magical happened in the audience. People began to sway gently with the music. Some closed their eyes and let the melody wash over them. Others smiled with recognition, remembering their own childhoods and their own grandmother's songs. David felt the connection between himself and the audience like electricity in the air. He realized that Alex had been right. This wasn't about showing off or proving anything. This was about sharing something beautiful with people who cared about him. When the lullaby ended, the silence lasted for several heartbeats. Then the entire community center erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping and cheering and calling out David's name. Some were crying. Others were laughing with joy. Everyone was amazed by what they had just witnessed. David stood up from the piano bench and looked out at the audience. These were his people, his community, and they were celebrating him. Not because he was perfect, but because he had shared something real and beautiful with them. Alex joined David at center stage and put his arm around the boy's shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen, David." The applause continued for what felt like forever. David waved shyly at the audience, his face bright with the biggest smile of his life. But the evening wasn't over yet. Alex had one more surprise. "David," Alex said, speaking into the microphone so everyone could hear, "my band and I have been talking, and we've made a decision. We want to help you continue your musical education. We're setting up a fund to pay for piano lessons and maybe even music school if that's what you want." David's mouth fell open. "Music school? Real piano lessons?" He looked at Alex with disbelief. "Sir, are you serious?" "Completely serious. You have a gift, David. And gifts like yours should be nurtured and developed. We want to help you become the musician you're meant to be." The audience erupted in cheers again. David's parents looked stunned. His father stood up and made his way toward the stage, wanting to thank these generous Americans who believed in his son. After the concert, people surrounded David and his family. Neighbors who had known David his whole life looked at him with new respect and amazement. The village chief made a speech about how proud the community was of their young musician. But for David, the most important moment came when a little girl, maybe 6 years old, tugged on his shirt and looked up at him with wide eyes. "David," she said, "when you were playing piano, it made me feel happy inside. Can you teach me to play too?" David knelt down to the little girl's level and smiled. "Maybe someday I can. But first I have to learn a lot more myself." Over the next few months, everything changed for David. True to their word, Alex and his band established a scholarship fund that paid for David to attend the best music school in Accra. He traveled to the city 3 times a week for lessons with a professional piano teacher. David learned proper technique and music theory, but he never lost the natural feeling that had made his playing so special. His teacher was amazed by David's ability to blend formal training with his intuitive musical gifts. Within a year, David was performing regularly with youth orchestras and jazz ensembles in Accra. Music schools in other countries started inviting him to participate in their programs. He received offers to study in America and Europe. But David never forgot where he came from or the community that had supported him. Every few months, he returned to his village to perform free concerts at the community center. He started teaching piano lessons to local children, passing on his knowledge to the next generation. The broken keyboard that had started it all was now displayed in the community center as an inspiration to other young people. A plaque next to it read, "Dreams have no limits when you have the courage to pursue them." 3 years after that first performance, David received an invitation that made him cry with joy. He was asked to perform as a featured soloist with a major symphony orchestra, the youngest musician ever to receive such an honor. The night of the performance, David walked onto the stage of a grand concert hall, wearing a tuxedo and sitting down at a concert grand piano that cost more than his family's house. In the audience were music critics, professional musicians, and classical music lovers from around the world. But when David placed his hands on the keys and began to play, he thought about his grandmother's lullaby, his sister Grace listening from the doorway, and that magical evening when a 12-year-old boy with a broken keyboard had found the courage to share his music with the world. The music that flowed from his fingers that night was technically perfect and emotionally pure. It was the sound of dreams coming true, of talent meeting opportunity, of a young boy who refused to let anything stop him from sharing the music in his heart. And in a small village in Ghana, David's family and friends gathered around a radio, listening with pride as their son, their neighbor, their inspiration, showed the world what was possible when you believe in the power of music and the courage of the human spirit.